Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Here we go. Let's get started. It is Michael Brown Unplugged, and I got a lot to talk about today. I want to remind everybody that this Thursday at 7 p.m., we're going to do a Zoom meeting, Z-O-O-M, zoom.us. If you don't have that application on your laptop, it's real easy to download. I've been using it for meetings now for several months now, and it's quite easy to use. It's not going to put any malware or anything on your laptop, on your desktop, your iPad, whatever. But in lieu of having a event somewhere, which we're still trying to figure out when and how to do that, we thought we would do this Zoom meeting. And that would allow everybody that's been listening to the podcast, everybody that's subscribed to it, and anybody that just happens to run across the podcast, you're just crossing the street and bam, somebody hits you and you go, oh, holy cow, Michael Brown Unplugged. It will give you the opportunity. We'll have a moderator, but we'll have a real-time conversation starting at 7 p.m. Mountain Time this Thursday, which, let me calculate, is the 11, 12, 13. Is that the 13th? Let me pull up my calendar and just make sure. I should have checked this beforehand, right? Yes, this Thursday, the 13th at 7 p.m. Now, I'm not quite sure. I think on that Thursday morning, I will give you the Zoom meeting code so that you can log in, and you'll see my beautiful mugshot along with probably Steve, my executive producer, and we'll take questions, comments, and really it's a two-way conversation. In order for Steve and I to find out kind of what you guys like about the podcast, what you'd like to see us doing differently. Not that I'm going to do that, but snark. We'd like to hear what you like and what you don't like about the podcast, and what can we do to help you guys spread the word of the podcast far and beyond the reach that we're currently getting. Although I have to admit, I'm not upset with the reach that we have, because when you compare the numbers that I have on this podcast compared to numbers when I was doing a podcast for another company, we are, if you count both downloads and plays, we're just like at more than 80% of where we were. Now, that's obviously not counting the people that would listen in their cars on terrestrial radio, but just in terms of the people that would download or play a podcast on the iHeart app, now that we're on iTunes, we're on Spreaker, everywhere else, when you count the downloads and the plays, we're at some 80% of where we were 2 or 3 months ago. So I want to thank all of you for that. I truly do appreciate it. We weren't quite certain. You start out on any endeavor. You have a business plan, you've got your model, you understand what your goals and objectives are, but you're never quite sure where it's going to go. And I have to admit that in this little endeavor, in my little corner of the universe, it has exceeded expectations. But being the competitive person that I am, now that I've exceeded expectations, I want to grow it even more. And I need your help to do that. So this Thursday, 7 p.m., all you will need to do is go to zoom.us, and we'll provide the code. I don't think we can get the code in advance, but when we get the code, I'll provide the code. And then everybody can log in, and we'll have a grand time. You can ask me questions, be a kind of a Ask Michael Anything episode. Plus, we'll find out what you guys like and don't like about the podcast. So enough about that. This Thursday, 7 p.m., zoom.us. So let's get started with the first story of the day, which comes to us from the Detroit Free Press. I'm one of these believers that, first of all, I'm an early adopter of technology. If you show me a gadget, a program, something that is technologically related, I like to adopt those things early. I like to tinker with them. Most of the podcasts that I listen to, surprisingly, are not political in nature, but they're predominantly tech podcasts because I like to keep up with what the young whippersnappers are doing in terms of the tech world. But I've always believed that the pace of technology is going to far exceed whatever problem we may think we have today. There's a solution that's already being developed somewhere that we're not even aware of. Or there's going to be some sort of serendipitous discovery in a laboratory somewhere that's going to solve a problem that we thought was an intractable problem that we couldn't solve. Climate change. I don't think we're ever going to stop the climate from changing, but what I do believe is that as the climate changes, as it goes from one extreme to another extreme, as we go from global warming to global cooling, it's really pretty much all you can do other than just remain stable for a while. Which, by the way, reminds me, I read somewhere that we've reached the maximum. I know this sounds like a contradiction in terms, but we've reached the maximum of the solar minimum, meaning that the solar flares and the solar activity from that great big orb in the sky that keeps us warm and lights the daylight, all of that activity has come to this screeching halt, which may account for some of the odd weather that we're having, but more importantly, when it goes back to increased activity, might mean that we're going to see more disruption in terms of our of Wi-Fi, the internet, banking systems, financial systems, whatever it might be, as the sun goes into solar maximum and goes into much more solar activity, we're going to see disruptions in the power grid and other things. But why did I go off? I went off on that primarily because I do believe that the climate is always going to change, regardless of what we do. It just, the arrogance of those who think that somehow a public policy or spending money is going to change what the climate do is the height of arrogance. It is actually, in secular terms, it is this belief that if God created the heavens and the earth, that somehow some policy coming out of Washington, D.C. is going to change the natural cycles that the earth and the entire solar system goes through. That is the height of arrogance. Now, I'm not one to criticize. I think that if you've ever read any of Ayn Rand's book, you know that Dagny thinks that arrogance, when it is deserved, is actually a good thing. But in this case, I don't think arrogance is very good. What I think arrogance is this idea that somehow 535 yahoos plus an equivalent amount in other parliaments or congresses or governing bodies around the world are somehow going to come up with a public policy, which public policy means what? You're going to spend money. And that by spending money, you're going to be able to change what nature naturally does. That drives me nuts. But here's what I do think that we can do. We can actually mitigate against climate change. So if we just admit, hey, the climate's going to change, we're going to go through warming periods, we're going to go through cooling periods. And each of those is going to result in different kinds of weather patterns. Or it's going to result in different types of, maybe the sea level's going to rise. I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe it is. How do you stop the sea level from rising? You can't. You can't. Think about what it would take in terms of a public policy to stop the sea levels from actually rising or lowering. Or think about this. If we're going to go into a global warming period, and that's going to, for example, in North America, in the northern hemisphere, that is going to increase the growing season, who are we to bitch about that? Who are we to complain about, Now we can grow asparagus in a longer season. We can grow okra. How many of you even know what okra is? We can actually grow that in a longer season. My point is very simple. We need to stop trying to change what Mother Nature is naturally going to do. Because to think that we can stop that, change that, is the height of, in fact, it's misplaced arrogance. It is the height of arrogance. But here's what we can do. You ready for a shocker? If the climate's going to change, which I believe that it is going to do, and I'm using sea level rise as just an example. If the sea level is going to rise, which I seriously doubt, again, go fill a glass full of ice cubes and then fill it to the brim with water and then set it on the counter and let the ice melt. No. You understand displacement? You understand that it's not going, the ice as it melts is not going to spill over the glass. The same is true with sea level rise. But let's just for the sake of argument, let's believe that the sea level is going to rise. Well, if we can't stop that, what can we do? Well, we can mitigate against it. If we truly believe that the sea level is going to rise by 12 inches so that the East River or the Hudson River or the Atlantic along Miami-Dade County or the Pacific along Highway 1 going up the California coast, if we believe that there's going to be a 12-inch rise in sea level, or Galveston, Texas, I don't care, pick whatever coastal area you want to pick, what's the answer? The answer is not to try to stop what Mother Nature is doing. The answer is to mitigate against what Mother Nature is going to do, regardless of what humans do. So if, just for the sake of argument, the sea levels are going to rise, then what should we be doing? We should be looking at how do we mitigate against all of that water, that 12 inches of additional water that at high tide is going to flood parts of New York City, or is going to flood Miami-Dade County, or is going to inundate Galveston, or is going to inundate, Malibu. But then who cares about Malibu, right? Why aren't we instead focusing on mitigation? Why aren't we focusing on what are the things that we can do as human beings, not to stop what is naturally going to happen, but what is it that we can do that instead of trying to stop what is naturally going to happen, what can we do to mitigate against the effects of what's naturally going to happen? Maybe that's building higher seawalls. Maybe that's building levees. And I'm not talking about the dumbass, crappy levees in Louisiana. Or for that matter, if you're not aware of it, the crappy levees that exist, say, between Sacramento and San Francisco, that if there's ever huge flooding events there, will be just as bad as it would be in New Orleans. Why aren't we doing those kinds of things? You know why? Because that does not involve government control. That simply involves the government saying, oh, we have a problem here, just as we continue to build levees along the Mississippi River, just as long as we continue to build safe rooms in Tornado Alley, just as long as we continue to build evacuation zones in hurricane areas, just as we continue to build safe zones around communities and houses that are built up against or inside a national forest or a wooded area. Why aren't we doing those kinds of things? We don't do those kinds of things because they're practical. They have a real-world effect. They can save lives. But you have to put the money up front. You have to put the money up front before something actually happens. And we are a reactive country as opposed to a proactive country. We don't want to do anything until the proverbial feces has hit the fan, and then it's like, oh my gosh, we have to do something. So I would simply argue that what we ought to be doing is we ought to be mitigating against the natural cycle that Mother Nature is going to impose on us. Or we can do stupid things like this to bring it right back to the Detroit Free Press. The Detroit Free Press reports that you may recall, if you don't recall, let me enlighten you. The city of Detroit installed 65,000 LED streetlights because they wanted to cut costs and they wanted to reduce pollution and increase safety. So the city of Detroit spent $185 million. Now that's a lot of light bulbs. I haven't gone to Home Depot yet. I know these are different kinds of light bulbs, but still, $185 million. Now, part of that was provided by the Department of Energy under President Obama. But here's why I keep talking about we need to learn to mitigate, and we need to understand that there will be technological advances that we're not even aware of yet, that if we just learn to be patient, might actually pay off in the long run. 3 years after Detroit installed 65,000 LED streetlights, guess what they're doing? They're now having to replace all of them. These bulbs were expected to last at least until the year 2027. But no, now the Public Lighting Authority in Detroit is replacing the nearly 20,000 bulbs as the city is suing the San Jose, California company Leotech Electronics, which supplied the LED lights. They're suing them because the inspectors in Detroit discovered that the bulbs were charred, burned, or cracked, and the bulbs that were supposed to last at least a decade have failed. Just failed. So the $185 million, of course, now they're going to have to sue, so there'll be litigation, and whether or not they can recover their costs or not remains to be seen. But that's a secondary point. The more important point is this. If we would just allow the free market to make the determination about which technologies are ready to be adopted and which are not, consumers will make that choice. Consumers will be the deciding factor about whether or not it is now time to adopt X technology. And in this case, it was the government forcing, oh my gosh, we have to have these LED lights because it's going to save so much money. It's going to cut down on all this pollution. It's going to reduce power costs. It's going to increase safety. I mean, it was going to do everything but, toast and butter your bread for you. And instead, they're having to sue because the bulbs aren't working. They spent $185 million to replace the bulbs. To initially replace the bulbs. And now they're spending $9 million to try to fix the problem. Wouldn't it have been easier instead of the government forcing this change on Detroit, and instead of the numbnut yahoos on the Detroit City Council saying, oh, yes, let's go ahead and do this now? Instead, let the technology develop. Let it be tested. Let us find out what really works and doesn't work, as opposed to jumping to the conclusion that just because we think it's going to somehow solve some portion of the climate so-called crisis. Instead, let's just let the marketplace do what the marketplace does best. Well, it's election season, and that means that all the loons have come out. Case in point, Charlottesville, Virginia. There's a 37-year-old accountant from Charlottesville who is running for Congress as an independent candidate. He is an admitted pedophile, and he brags in website posts about having raped his late ex-wife. According to Yahoo News, in a phone call, Larson confirmed that he created the now-defunct websites soup.org and Encephalopolis something .today that were chat rooms that served as gathering places for pedophiles and violence-minded misogynists like himself. So the Huffington Post contacted him after confirming that his campaign website shared an IP address with those forums. His sites were terminated by the domain host on Tuesday. But on the phone, he was open about his pedophilia, and he seemed unfazed about his long odds of attaining government office. Now, do not misread me at all. If a pedophile wants to run for public office, have at it. If someone who brags about raping his late ex-wife in a chat room or a website, and you think you have the wherewithal to run for the United States Congress, have at it. Just have at it. But here's what bugs me about this. He said to the Huffington Post, a lot of people are tired of political correctness and being constrained by it. People prefer when there's an outsider who doesn't have anything to lose and is willing to say what's on a lot of people's minds. When asked whether he was a pedophile or he just writes about pedophilia, he told the Huffington Post, well, it's a mix of both. When people go over the top, there's a grain of truth to what they say. Asked whether there was a grain of truth in his essay about father-daughter incest and another about raping his ex-wife repeatedly, he simply said, yes. You know, have at it. Run for Congress. But if you want proof that there is no longer any guardrails in our society, there was a time that you would have been embarrassed to admit that you are a convicted pedophile. You would have been embarrassed to ever have admitted to having literally raped your wife. And instead, now we brag about these things. Well, I shouldn't say we, he. He brags about these things. He also brags about Adolf Hitler being a white supremacist hero. When you don't have guardrails, there's no longer any embarrassment. There's no longer any shame. I don't know that I want to live in a society where everything goes. I do want to live in a society where if this guy wants to run for Congress, he has the absolute right to do so. All he has to do is go pay the filing fee, submit the petitions, whatever it might be for him to run in this congressional district in Virginia, have at it. But what I don't accept and what I don't like is the fact that somehow we put him up on a pedestal and say, oh, look how tolerant we are. Well, I'm not tolerant. If I were in Virginia, first of all, I don't know whether I would choose to completely ignore this dirtbag or whether I would go after him. Because I know Congress, without any help on its own, has one of the poorest reputations in the entire universe. And now here's a guy who's a pedophile admitting to raping his wife, who's now running for Congress. And I just think it's an example of political correctness run amok. Because in the story that I have in front of me, there is no, and it's a news story, so I will grant you it's a news story. So fortunately for, in this case, Huffington Post, they are simply reporting on the fact that you have a pedophile and a rapist running for Congress. But isn't there somebody somewhere in the Charlottesville area that is going to talk about how disgusting this is and about how wrong it would be to send someone like this to Congress? He's running on a platform where he calls himself a quasi-neo-reactionary libertarian candidate. That includes protecting gun ownership rights, establishing free trade, protecting benevolent white supremacy, as well as legalizing incestuous marriage and child pornography. All right, I'm done. Out of here. Unacceptable. Run all you want, but I hope you get your ass beat. And as long as we're on the subject of dumbassery, you know Ilham Omar, who is the Muslim congresswoman from Minnesota, she tweeted out yesterday, or maybe the day before, it doesn't make any difference, a story from CBS News, the headline of which is, Big Pharma ushers in New Year by raising prices of more than 1,000 drugs. And the subhead is, consumers may have to pay more for a range of medications in 2019 as drug makers boost their costs. Now, I haven't read the story. I don't need to read the story. I'm not going to read the story. I want instead to focus on what a United States Congressman, Ilham Omar, who is, in my opinion, anti-American, who, in my opinion, even though she had the right to run, the fact that we have someone who is an anti-Semite, who believes in Sharia law, who is the antithesis of all American values, is sitting on the Foreign Relations Committee and is actually helping make the laws that govern you and me. So in response to this article from CBS News about Big Pharma is raising the prices of 1,000 drugs, she tweeted this: "It is wrong for Big Pharma to profit off of sickness. We need Medicare for all because health care is a human right." You know, if everybody, I want you to stop and think about this. Let's take her argument to its logical conclusion, because this is the stupidity that passes for economics understanding in today's United States Congress. It is wrong for Big Pharma to profit off of sickness. Okay. If everybody got free medication, where are the drug companies going to get the money to produce this free medication? And where are the drug companies or the government or anybody else going to get the money to pay for all the research that it takes to make these medicines? Do you think she's ever thought about that? Or do you think she's completely ignorant of how things work in the world economically? That kind of thinking is utterly insane. But let's take it a step further. If Medicare for all, because we need Medicare for all, she says, because health care is a human right. You know, in order for me to have health, I have to eat. If I don't eat, I starve to death. That destroys my health. And in fact, if I don't eat, if I don't hydrate, if I don't consume nourishment, my body organs will begin to break down. My body will begin to feed on itself. My stomach will become distended. And fairly quickly, I'll starve to death. So if health care is a human right, what is the basis for health? Nutrition. So nutrition must be a human right. Food must be a human right by her logic. So is it wrong for Big Grocery to profit off hunger? Because I'm going to get hungry today, and I'm either going to go to the grocery store and make sure that the refrigerator and the pantry and everything is filled with food so that I can eat so I won't starve to death. Is it wrong for Big Grocery to be profiting off my hunger? And if nutrition is essential to health, then isn't nutrition a human right? You see, it never ends. This is how I chuckle because it is so blatantly stupid. Healthcare is a human right. Okay, well, if healthcare is a human right, then I need food. And I need good food. I don't need cheeseburgers from McDonald's all the time. I need, like I haven't felt well the last couple of days. I need some really good chicken soup. Yeah, chicken soup. And it would be nice to have, I don't know, something nice to drink along with that. Get me some really nice carbonated water, because, I mean, water must be a human right also. So I need the government to provide me nutrition, and I need the government to provide me with hydration so that I can actually have my health, so that I can exercise that human right of having health. It's insane. Those of you who ever listened to me on the radio program know that there was and I forget whether it was from Santa Barbara, Sacramento, but somebody maybe it was the San Jose Mercury News. Somebody had written a story about, it is now time, this was back when we were debating Obamacare, before we actually had Obamacare, that groceries needed to be nationalized. And they took all of the reasons for wanting to nationalize health care and applied it to grocery stores. We all need a certain amount of caloric intake every day. We need certain nutrients in our body in order to live a healthy life. So I think we need to revisit that. But more importantly than revisiting the idea of groceries, I mean, it's wrong for big grocery to profit off hunger, right? Where does it stop? With these people, it doesn't stop. With these people, it just continues every single thing that you can imagine. Because in order for me, let's say that, okay, so we've nationalized grocery stores. Big grocery shouldn't be making a profit off hunger. Big pharma shouldn't be making a profit off sickness. Well, in order for me to nourish myself and in order to have good health, I need shelter. So I guess it's wrong for realtors and it's wrong for home builders to profit off homelessness. So shelter is a basic human right. And by Ilham Omar's logic, what we should do is we should not only nationalize big pharma, we should nationalize the grocery stores, and we should also nationalize what? Homes. The government should provide us all homes. I mentioned earlier last week about the HBO special on Chernobyl. And one of the things that Tamara and I noticed, because I spent a lot of time in Russia, and if you've never been there, you've probably nonetheless seen the gigantic, I mean just huge apartment complexes that the old Soviet government officials built to house all of these citizens of the Soviet Union. Well, they still exist. And the only difference in them today from the old Soviet Union days is they've been painted a little bit. But they're in essence these multi-story cinder block buildings of just, drab. Everyone's the same. Everyone is about the size of a studio apartment in New York City. And they're awful. They're dehumanizing, they're degrading, they're just virtually unlivable. Well, in the HBO series Chernobyl, at the side of the Chernobyl complex, I forget the Pripyat, I think was the name of the little town where Chernobyl was located. It showed these old houses. It showed, when they filmed it, they recreated these old Soviet-style housing complexes because Chernobyl occurred back in the 1980s when the Soviet Union still existed. And as I looked at those, Tamara and I both chuckled that, well, they didn't really make it realistic because these look new and they look painted, even though they're still the same old cinder block construction. So why don't we do that in this country? We have a homeless problem. We actually have a problem with housing prices being out of control. So if health care is a human right, and in order to have health, we need food, so food becomes a human right. And in order to survive the elements, you need shelter, so shelter becomes a human right. You see where this goes? This is the thinking of a United States Congressman, Ilham Omar, the Muslim woman from Minnesota, who thinks that the solution to all of the ills of society all lie within the government. And where does that lead? That leads to communism. Now, it goes through different stages. It starts with, we're going to provide this and we're going to provide that, and it just keeps growing and growing, and you become a social, you become a democratic socialist country, and then you become a full-fledged socialist country, and then you become a fascist or a communist country. It's where it all leads to. It always has, it always will. And she's a member of the United States Congress. But hey, why am I getting upset? What do I care? I say, go for it. I just say, go for it. As long as we're going to jump off this cliff of everything is a right, and that government has to provide those rights, which in and of itself is an entirely different podcast, because you and I know that our rights don't come from the government. Our rights derive from our existence as human beings. Our rights, we have our rights because we are made in the nature of God. We're made in the image of God. We have those rights because we're human beings. We don't have them because of government. But they want to bastardize it, and they want to take these rights, and they want to make these rights government rights. Well, if the government gives you a right, the government can take away a right. And so what happens? The system ultimately collapses on itself. You don't have to look very far to see that. You can see what's happening to the economy in China. You can see what's happening in Russia. You can see what's happening in Havana. You can see what's happening in Venezuela, Caracas. You can see what's happening anywhere where this is being taken to its logical conclusion. Do not forget the name, Ilham Omar, the congresswoman from Minnesota. She is, remember yesterday we talked about by any means necessary, the communists on the Denver City Council? That's what this woman is doing. She is the foot in the door. And by any means necessary, she and her ilk will destroy this country if we are not forever vigilant. And even though we're still quite a ways away to even the first Democrat presidential debate, nonetheless, we're actually starting to get the first poll numbers out. And I don't really care in terms of who's in the lead right now, because that's going to change probably 1,000 times between now and the Democrat convention. And I forget who goes first next time. Anyway, July or August of 2020. But more important to me is, what do the polls show about where are the Democrat voters today with respect to the issues? So CNN commissioned a poll, and they found that these were the top issues.
And, of course, we asked about the issues. What is driving you to support someone? What's most important? Look at that. The right to an abortion, 79% call it a must-have. Climate change as the greatest threat, 75%. And restoring an assault-style weapon ban, 57%. So abortion, climate, and guns are the top driving issues. John.
Can you imagine? Just think about that for a moment. This is Iowa, too. Now, I know that Iowa's like any other state. You've got the urban areas, you've got the rural areas, you've got the urban-rural divide, you have all of that. But when you think about Iowa, just in terms of flyover country, and then you think about Iowa Democrats, you would think that Iowa Democrats would be a little more moderate. But for those that are likely to go to the caucus, that are actually going to participate, their top three issues, by an overwhelming margin: the right to an abortion, climate change is an existential threat to the existence of this country, and I don't know why I'm laughing about the third one, they want to restore an assault-style weapon ban. That's the phrase in the poll. restore an assault-style weapon ban. Almost 60% of likely in-person caucus goers want an assault-style weapon ban and believe that climate change is an existential threat to the country and that right to an abortion is the premier issue, at least today. Now, I think the other issues were Medicare for all, student debt forgiveness, the Green New Deal, free public college tuition, voting rights for all felons, and breaking up big tech. If you ever doubted that there was a huge divide between those who I would say are right of center, whether that's libertarian or conservative, versus those who are now left of center, who I think I would have said left of center and being a liberal and a progressive or just an out-and-out fascist or a communist. But I think all of the space left of the ideological center, everything left of that center, I think, today is taken up by Marxists. A right to an abortion, climate change, assault-style weapons ban, Medicare for all, student debt forgiveness, the Green New Deal, free public college tuition, voting rights for all felons, and breaking up big tech. There is a huge divide in this country. This election, not just for the presidency, but for the House and the Senate, is ours to lose. Because if those are the most important issues to Iowa caucus goers this far out, those will flip a little bit. They'll interchange. But when you look at those, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, those 9 top issues, I don't think many of them will drop out of the top 10. They'll stay there, which means that those that are left of the ideological center really are Marxists. There's not much wiggle room, if any, left in that supposedly big tent that is the Democrats. We're at least on the right side of the political spectrum. We can recognize that, Roe versus Wade, the right to an abortion was made out of whole cloth. That is a horribly decided decision. Climate change is not an existential threat. We're clearly against an assault-style weapon ban. I don't even know what an assault-style weapon is. Medicare for all is not going to work. Why should we pay student debt forgiveness? The Green New Deal? Are you freaking kidding me? Free public college tuition? Voting rights for all felons? Yeah. I mean, I can just see the Democrat get out the vote drive at Supermax in Colorado. Yeah, we're going to go down. We're going to get Ted Kaczynski to be sure and vote this year. Good grief. I'm sorry to chuckle, but I sometimes look at the things that are going on in politics, and I just think to myself, I feel so sorry for my grandkids because they've got to deal with this baloney, this absolute unadulterated dumbassery. Whereas I'm at that stage of my life where I can recognize it's just stupid and it's just not going to work. I don't know if many of you have ever been to the website Quora, Quora.com, Quora.com. It's one of the websites I occasionally go to because there are always, it's one of these websites where it's a Q&A website. People ask questions, and then the answers to the questions are crowdsourced. So you might, there are always, for whatever reason, there are a lot of questions about airplanes and flight, how, turbulence, anything to do with flying. Well, today there was one that to me, I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. The question was very simple. It's only like 9 words. The question is this: is it okay to have bare feet on airplanes? Is it okay to have bare feet on airplanes? So a flight attendant answered the question. But before I tell you just even part of the flight attendant's answer to the question, is it okay to have bare feet on airplanes? I have a question. Are you an idiot? I don't know. It's bad enough when I see people getting on the airplanes wearing their pajamas. I don't get it. I think it is the decline of civilization that you actually have to ask the question. I mean, were you brought up in a barn? Is it okay for me to go barefoot on an airplane, on a commercial airliner? Now, if you're flying your own Gulfstream 650, have at it. You know, if you got your own Gulfstream, you got your own Citation, you got your own whatever. I don't care if you have bare feet or not. That's up to you. But if you're on a commercial airline with me, at least keep your socks on. Seriously? Anyway, here's what the flight attendant said. Sanitary. I can't tell you what is on the floor in the lavatories. Let's just say that some men aren't very specific. Seems they're happy if they hit anything. In their defense, turbulence is never very helpful. So that liquid on the floor just might not be water. And are you sure you want to find out? It'd be bad enough barefooted, but imagine your socks. They're generally made of absorbent material meant to keep your feet dry. So they, in essence, act like a sponge. You just use the lavatory, and now your feet are soaked with God knows what. You walk out of the lavatory and through the cabin, bringing that mystery liquid all through the cabin and to your seat, where eventually you will put your shoes on over those same socks. And just imagine those same socks walking through the galley where all the meals are prepared. You get where I'm going here? Not only that, and here is the money quote for this question. Remember, the question is it okay to go barefoot on the airplane? Not only that, says this FA, but it's disrespectful to your fellow passengers. Really? And I don't know why she felt compelled to say this, but in the final part of her answer, she wrote, "Oh yeah, and please don't put your feet on the tray tables. People eat there, or on the headrest of the seat in front of you. Shoes or no shoes, just don't." We have to get back to some point where manners, just simple manners. I don't know whether I'm more flabbergasted by the fact that somebody asked the question or the fact that somebody had to answer the question. You've heard me talk before about the importance, I think, of us kind of reinstituting the moon program, that we ought to be trying to explore the moon. Yes, Mars is fascinating, and God bless us for trying to go to Mars, and but it really seems to me that the way to compete with China and to make certain that we're not left in the dust, so to speak, is that we figure out a way that we reinstitute the moon program, the lunar program, so that we can start discovering maybe, rare metals that we might be able to mine from the moon that would give us a competitive advantage against China, Russia, or any of these other countries that are trying to get back to the moon to find out what we can use there. Apparently, we're not ever going to be able to do that. Now, those of you that are listening that are engineers may have a perfectly good explanation for what I'm about to tell you, but I don't get it. I just don't get it. Apparently, one of the reasons we can't go back to the moon is because we have lost all of the NASA telemetry data that we gathered during all of the Apollo flights. Dr. David Williams, who is the NASA Goddard Archivist, was approached as he was getting in his car or something and said this.
This film you're making now, what is it? Does it have a name? I mean, do you have a name for it yet?
I think I'm calling it Did We Go?
Did We Go? Okay.
Doesn't have it either. The Smithsonian doesn't have it. Johnson doesn't have it.
Right. We've been unable to track it down. I mean, we don't know where this telemetry data ended up, and we don't know what path it may have taken. So, unfortunately, I'm afraid I can't really give you much of a clue as to where this data ended up and whether it still exists or not.
So we have a NASA Goddard archivist. So there must be, a repository of archival material somewhere. And here's Dr. David Williams basically telling this reporter, yeah, I'm the archivist, but we can't find it. Don Pettit, a former NASA astronaut, also said,
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
We destroyed the technology? We didn't archive the technology? We didn't save the technology? Gene Kranz, Apollo 11 NASA flight director, said this.
I haven't seen anything that indicates the telemetry data is even in existence. And as I said, even if we had it, we don't have the machines to play it back.
But your own research has shown the telemetry data is missing.
That's right.
The telemetry data is missing. Yeah, and we don't have the machines. I can take a 10, 15, 20-year-old computer, and assuming the hard drive is still readable, I can take it down to one of the big box stores, and they can recover that data off a virtually destroyed hard drive. But then I know where the hard drive is. Here we can't even find the telemetry data. We can't go back to the moon. Now, I find it difficult to believe. Look, this is a totally surface understanding of what's going on here. But my surface understanding is these three people, a former NASA flight director from Apollo 11, the archivist, Dr. David Williams, and a former astronaut, Don Pettit, all three say, yeah, we can't go to the moon. We don't have the technology. What do you mean we don't have the technology? Yeah, well, even if we had the technology, we don't have the data. We don't have the telemetry data that we developed during the Apollo missions. And so, therefore, we can't go to the moon. Are you freaking kidding me? We're the freaking United States of America. We can do whatever we want to do, anything we want to do. And, in fact, not only can we do anything we want to do.
Want to go into space? NASA said today it's going to open the International Space Station to tourists. Might happen as early as next year, but it won't be cheap. Private companies, Boeing and SpaceX, are expected to charge, get this, up to $58 million, and that's round trip. Guess how much room and board is? $35,000 a night.
So maybe for the $58 million, maybe if we can get Jeff Bezos, or we can get, Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or somebody to blast off and go to the space station for $58 million. Do you think we could then take that $58 million and either find the telemetry data or maybe develop the technology that would help us rebuild the telemetry data? I don't know. I just find it utterly, this is government at work for you. Yeah, we put a man on the moon. We went to the moon, and we can't find the records. we don't. For every nut job, and I'm sorry if you're one of these nut jobs, but for every nut job out there that believes that we never went to the moon, that it was just a big Hollywood production, filmed somewhere in a studio, a sound stage in Burbank, maybe you're right. Maybe we never went to the moon because we can't find any data to go back to the moon. Alexandria OcasioCortez. She has a consensus policy director. Now, I don't know actually, let me rephrase that. The technical title she has, this Rihanna Gunn Wright, is New Consensus Policy Director. Well, she apparently is all in on the Green New Deal. And in fact, if we don't do something...
A CNN SSRS poll indicates that 82% of Democrats say that aggressive action on climate change is necessary. How do you get this? I mean, there's so many things. If you talk to voters out there, there's so many things they're concerned about right now. Healthcare and gun violence and immigration and the economy. Climate change is obviously up there, and it's often number 1, 2, 3, or 4. But how do you make the argument that it needs a separate discussion? Why not healthcare?
So in the issues that you just brought up, climate change is one of the main drivers of our public health. So the difference between, say, 1.5 degrees of warming, which is the least that folks think that we can get, to 2, you're talking about 150 million deaths. That's 25 Holocausts, right? So how is that not a health issue? How is that not about health care, right? You're talking about immigration. Climate change is going to bring hundreds of millions of climate migrants, of climate refugees, both from outside the U.S. and inside the U.S. as you see people move. So even the issues that you outline, all of them are affected by climate change, and how you decide to deal with climate is how you decide to deal with all of these other issues.
Oh, it's going to lead to holocausts is what it's going to do. You know, NPR had a story talking about how climate change is affecting mental health.
Climate change is having a big impact on human health and mental health specifically. That's the bottom line of a new report from 27 European academies of science. You know, and I have to admit, they're right. It's having an impact on my mental health. It's driving me freaking crazy. But exactly how something as big as the climate crisis affects mental health is a question that Helen Berry wrestles with every day. She's a psychiatric epidemiologist and a professor of climate change and mental health at the University of Sydney in Australia. Professor, it seems almost intuitive that climate change could affect our mental health, but is there actual evidence that that's true?
So the short answer is yes, of course. And the long answer is no, it's incredibly difficult to do this kind of work, partly because climate systems themselves are extremely complex, and partly because mental health is also extremely complex, and bringing those together makes a very huge and difficult puzzle. But it makes for some great grant money, doesn't it? Yeah, the climate is very complex. Well, then how do you know that, you're going to do what you're going to do and it's going to fix the climate if it's an incredibly complex system? And mental health, as we know, is very complex also. So, yeah, you're just making a boatload of money out of combining these two. Man, oh, man, this stuff drives me. See, mental health, it's driving me nuts. But I think it's really important to apply some common sense here, which is what you implied in your question. Common sense. I don't think that common sense and climate change belong in the same sentence. So whatever this climate science epidemiologist, whatever she called herself, I think she's the nut job. And also to understand how we can go about approaching this problem so we can eventually get the scientific answers that we want. Oh, so we can, wait a minute. So we can get the answers that we want? I thought the whole thing about scientific inquiry was just getting the answers, not the answers you want. That's like a cop saying, I've decided that you're the guilty person. I'm going to get the evidence to prove you're guilty instead of just following the evidence. That's fascinating to me. She wants to study this so she can get the answers she wants. Go about approaching this problem so we can eventually get the scientific answers that we want. Get the answers that we want. Don't forget that. So let's get some taxpayer relief shots in. The first one comes to us from Clayton County, Georgia.
Clayton County police say a homeowner who shot and killed a suspected intruder will likely not face charges.
Yeah, neighbors tell Fox 5 they can't believe this deadly scene unfolded on their otherwise quiet street. As neighbors returned home tonight, they spoke with Fox 5's Will Nunley. He joins us now from the Clayton County Police Headquarters. Will?
And Russ, a lot of the neighbors I spoke with say that they're just surprised to learn how young the suspected intruder really was. Meanwhile, tonight, police are trying to piece together why this young man targeted this house, reportedly unarmed, but why he targeted this house in particular.
really sad case.
As the sun set Friday, officers continued to patrol Jenny Circle in Clayton County, speaking with neighbors. This is the house where 18-year-old Javen Jackson was shot by the homeowner early Friday during a suspected home invasion.
And the subject managed to get through the door and gain entry into the house. Once he gained entry into the house, he was confronted by the homeowner and subsequently shot.
Looked out the window and saw the guy laying on the ground.
Ricky Hayes is a neighbor and says he heard about 4 or 5 gunshots and came outside to find Jackson bleeding on the front steps of the home.
He was in pain. That was the obvious thing, but no comments or anything like that. Especially when I got out here, he was laying there.
The suspect died on the way to the hospital. Police believe the homeowner acted in self-defense and say he will likely not face charges in the shooting death.
Okay, and people have the right to defend themselves, and that's the part we want to drive home. You have the right to defend yourself.
For Hayes, it was a stunning scene that unfolded feet from his own home.
Don't know why or where it came from, and it's like the first incident that I know of that happened here.
You know, good for that sheriff. People have the right to defend themselves. Now, what you can't see on the video is this 18-year-old thug clearly was determined to get in the house no matter what. The glass is broken, the door's kicked in. He was doing everything that he could to get in. The next one comes to us from Riverside County, where a suspect is killed when, well, this one ticks me off because...
Now to Riverside County, an investigation underway after a man was killed in a deputy-involved shooting. This happened after 6:30 a.m. today in Menifee. Sheriff's officials say they spotted a vehicle that had been carjacked at gunpoint earlier, the driver that is. They attempted to pull over the suspect in Lake Elsinore, and then a pursuit ensued. The chase ended along Garland Lane. That's where officials say the suspect produced a firearm, prompting authorities to open fire, killing him. The Marietta Police Department says its K-9 Mick is recovering tonight after he was shot while assisting in that carjacking investigation. Police say the suspect shot the dog in the jaw and lower neck. Mick was rushed to an emergency vet where he was treated and has since been released. He is resting at home with his handler, and good news to report he's expected to make a full recovery.
Now, this is a thug lesson I never thought I'd have to give, but not only should you not get you've carjacked a car with a gun, and then when you're confronted by the cops, you not only point the gun at the cops, but you shoot the dog. Thugs. You shoot the dog, you're going to end up dead right there. Yeah. That's a free lesson from Michael Brown. Don't shoot the cops' dogs. All right? Don't shoot my dog either. The next taxpayer relief shot comes to us from Portland, Oregon.
Yeah, Bonnie, police are still out here investigating this evening. They've been here nearly all day, about 7 hours. We're on Northwest 14th Avenue and Lovejoy right now. This is 14th. You can see that mobile command center is still here. Things are actually starting to wind down. There were dozens of officers here earlier. Now, police tell us just before 10, they got a call that a man was armed with a knife and threatened to have an explosive device inside the Lovejoy building here. Now, it's a commercial building with a parking garage, and when officers got here, they found a man and a woman in the stairwell, and the woman appeared to be hurt. Police haven't given us all the details, but say there was some sort of fight. Officers first used less lethal force and then shot the suspect. He died before medics arrived, and the woman was taken to the hospital. Now, this whole thing prompted the Safeway here to evacuate and close. Jess Brown was shopping at the time.
We were shopping, and the employees said there's a bomb threat in the parking garage, and so we need to evacuate. So we just left our groceries in the cart and left the building.
The bomb squad arrived and determined there was no explosive and no threat to the public. Brown couldn't believe how quickly this all happened.
That's very surprising, because I would say it was less than 5 minutes between the time I was in the garage and the time we left the store. So I didn't see anything when I was there.
Yeah, well, guy holding a woman at knife point says he has a bomb. Yeah, once again, more than likely, you're going to end up dead right there. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Don't forget this Thursday, 7 p.m., we're going to do the Zoom.us town hall meeting. So be sure and sign up for Zoom.us so you can ask me questions and we can have a conversation Thursday night at 7 p.m. And as usual, please go to iTunes, subscribe to me on iTunes, Michael Brown Unplugged. Leave a 5-star review rating if you're willing to do so. Write a review if you have time. And then again on Spreaker, if you could like the podcast, because we're putzing around with the iHeart app, trying to get iHeart to approve the podcast. So I'm pulling out all the stops I can to get on the iHeart app. And I think having a certain number of likes, best we can tell, helps do that. So if you could like us on Spreaker, that helps too. And then last but not least, go to michaelbrowntoday.com. michaelbrowntoday.com, because there you can see all the places where you can subscribe to me on YouTube. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can do all of that by simply going to michaelbrowntoday.com. Again, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.